The heat in the Arizona territory did not just sit on the skin, it burrowed into the bone. It was a dry, aggressive heat that turned the interior of the overland stagecoach into an oven on wheels. Claire Donovan used a lace handkerchief to dab at the perspiration on her neck, though the linen had long since surrendered to the dust. Outside the window, the landscape was a sprawling, infinite canvas of burnt ochre and sage green. Red rock mesas rose like ancient cathedrals against a sky so blue it hurt her eyes to look at it directly. It was the year 1875, and Claire was 25 years old. She adjusted her posture against the hard leather seat, feeling the crinkle of the letter tucked inside her bodice. It was the correspondence from Thomas Caldwell, the man she had traveled 2,000 miles to marry. A sensible match. Her father had called it before he passed. A merchant. A man of numbers and inventory. Safe and predictable. Claire looked out at the wild, untamed horizon and felt a strange tightening in her chest. She told herself it was fear of the unknown, but deep down, in the place where she kept her father's hunting lessons and her own secret dreams, she knew it was excitement. You are staring at that wasteland like it is a painting in a gallery. Miss, the woman sitting across from her said, Mrs. Gable was a stern matron with a face like a dried apple doll, traveling to live with her son. There's nothing out there but rattlesnakes and Apache. The man beside Mrs. Gable, a nervous whiskey drummer named Mr. Evans, nodded vigorously. He wiped his bald head with a stained rag. She is right. Dangerous country, especially now. They say the mood has turned sour since that business last year. Claire turned her gaze from the window. What business? The death of the chief's brother. Mr. Evans lowered his voice, though there was no one to hear them but the wind and the driver shouting at the team of 6 horses. The brother of Nietzsche. They say he was found dead near the military outpost. The army called it a riding accident. Said his horse threw him down a ravine. Mrs. Gable sniffed disdainfully. And I suppose the savages did not believe it. An Apache does not fall off a horse. Ma'am. Mr. Evans said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Not unless he is dead before he hits the ground. Nietzsche believes it was murder. He believes it was the blue coats, or maybe the railroad men clearing the way for the new line. Now, the spirit of vengeance is in the wind. You can feel it. Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She touched the glass of the window. Nietzsche? She whispered the name, testing the weight of it. A devil. Mrs. Gable pronounced. A heathen devil who would sooner scalp us than look at us. You best stay close to the town limits. Miss Donovan, Lone Mesa is civilization. Beyond that is hell. The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit a rut, throwing Claire against the wooden wall. The driver cracked his whip, and the vehicle surged forward. Ahead, rising out of the heat haze like a mirage, were the wooden structures of Lone Mesa. The town was a collection of raw timber buildings and adobe structures clinging to the earth as if afraid the wind might blow them away. When the stagecoach finally ground to a halt in front of the depot, the dust cloud caught up with them, enveloping the passengers as they stepped down. Claire coughed, waving her hand in front of her face. Through the haze, she saw him. Thomas Caldwell stood near the depot platform. He was dressed in a suit that was too heavy for the climate, his high collar stiff and white. He held a bowler hat in his hands, his fingers working the brim nervously. He looked exactly as he had in his letters, decent, clean, and utterly terrified. Claire! He hurried forward as she stepped down. He did not embrace her. Instead, he took her hand and shook it gently, as if she were a business associate. You are here, thank God. You are safe. Hello, Thomas, Claire said. She offered him a tired smile. The journey was long, but I am quite well. Thomas did not look at her. His eyes darted over her shoulder, scanning the horizon, then looking toward the northern ridge where the American flag snapped in the wind, the location of the military fort. We must get your trunk. We must get you inside. It is not safe to loiter in the open. Thomas, it is 2 p.m, Claire pointed out gently. Surely we are safe in the middle of town. You do not understand the tension. Claire, things have changed. He signaled for a porter to take her trunk, his movements jerky and anxious. Come, I have arranged a room for you at the Silver Star Hotel. It is the most respectable place. I am staying at the boarding house down the street until the ceremony. As they walked down the boardwalk, the wood planking thumping beneath Claire's boots, she observed her betrothed. He was a handsome man in a soft way, with pale skin that reddened easily in the sun, but he seemed to shrink in on himself, as if trying to present the smallest possible target to the world. Is business going well? She asked, trying to bridge the gap between them. Yes, no, it is complicated, Thomas muttered. The railroad is coming. That brings money, but it brings other things. They entered the Silver Star. The lobby was adjacent to the dining room and the saloon, separated only by a pair of swinging doors. The smell of stale beer, tobacco smoke, and roasting beef hung heavy in the air. Wait here, Thomas said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. I will speak to the clerk. Claire stood near the entrance, smoothing the skirts of her travel dress. The swinging doors to the saloon opened, and a hush seemed to fall over the immediate vicinity. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a pristine blue uniform with gold buttons that caught the afternoon light. He wore a cavalry hat pulled low over his eyes, and his boots were polished to a mirror shine. Despite the dust outside, he moved with the easy arrogance of a predator who knows he has no natural enemies in the territory. Major, a passing cowboy tipped his hat, stepping off the boardwalk into the mud to make way. The officer stopped when he saw Claire. He took in her appearance, the dusty dress, the weary but intelligent eyes, the way she held her head high despite the fatigue. He removed his hat, revealing a head of thick, steel-gray hair and a face that was handsome but hard, like a statue carved from granite. Good afternoon, ma'am, he said. His voice was a rich baritone, smooth as aged whiskey. You must be a fresh arrival from the east. We do not get flowers like you blooming in this desert often. Claire felt a flush rise to her cheeks, not from flattery, but from the intensity of his gaze. It was a dissecting look. I arrived just now, sir. Thomas hurried back from the desk, and when he saw the officer, he froze. His face was drained of color. Major Briggs, I did not know you were in town. I go where I please. Caldwell, Major Harlan Briggs said, his eyes never leaving Claire. Introduce me. Yes, of course. This is Miss Claire Donovan, my fiancée. Thomas stammered the words. Claire, this is Major Harlan Briggs, commander of the garrison. A pleasure. Miss Donovan? Briggs took her gloved hand and bowed slightly over it. You have chosen a prudent man. Caldwell is very good at keeping his head down. The insult was wrapped in velvet, but it was an insult nonetheless. Claire withdrew her hand. The Major is kind enough to welcome me. I am merely doing my duty. Briggs smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. It is my job to ensure the safety of all decent citizens against the savagery of this land. Speaking of which, Briggs turned his head toward the open front door of the hotel. Outside, the sound of normal street traffic wagons, horses, shouting men had died away abruptly. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on Lone Mesa. Claire stepped toward the door, driven by a curiosity she could not suppress. Thomas reached out as if to stop her, but his hand fell away. Trembling. Outside, a procession was moving down the main street. They were not an army, but they commanded more space than a regiment. A group of 10 Apache warriors rode single file on lean, wiry Mustangs. They wore no shirts, their bronze skin painted with symbols that Claire did not understand. They carried rifles across their laps and knives at their waists. They did not look at the townspeople who watched them from the safety of windows and alleys. They stared straight ahead, their expressions unreadable masks of stone. In the lead rode a man who could be no one else but Naichi. He was terrifying and magnificent. He looked to be in his early 30s, his black hair hanging loose and long. His face was a landscape of sharp angles and deep shadows. There was a contained violence in the way he sat his horse, a coiled spring ready to snap. He did not look like a defeated man, nor a man seeking peace. He looked like a king riding through the territory of his subjects. As he passed the hotel, Major Briggs stepped out onto the boardwalk, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his saber. The challenge was silent but screamingly loud. Nietzsche turned his head. He looked at Briggs with a cold, absolute hatred that made the air between them crackle. Then, his gaze shifted. He looked at Claire. Time seemed to suspend itself. Claire felt the breath catch in her throat. The warrior's eyes were dark, almost black, but there was a fire behind them that burned with an intensity she had never encountered in the drawing rooms of the East. It was not a look of lust, nor of curiosity. It was a look of recognition. He saw her. Not the dress, not the dusty woman, but her. He looked at her as if he were memorizing her face for a future reckoning. The moment lasted less than a second. Nietzsche turned his eyes back to the road, kicked his horse lightly, and the procession continued, disappearing into the heat haze at the edge of town. Claire realized she had forgotten to breathe. "Filth," Briggs said softly, dusting a speck of invisible dirt from his sleeve. "They strut through here like they own the earth, but not for long." "They seemed peaceful," Claire said, the words slipping out before she could check them. Briggs laughed. "A sharp, barking sound. That is the deception of the viper. Miss Donovan. It is peaceful until it strikes. There is a supply train coming in tomorrow for the railroad expansion. Rumor has it Nietzsche plans to hit it. He claims we killed his brother. He wants blood for blood." "And did you?" Claire asked. She shocked herself with the question. She shocked Thomas even more. He made a strangulated noise of distress. Briggs turned his cold blue gaze back to her. The amusement was gone. "We maintain order. Miss Donovan, accidents happen in the desert. Men fall, horses stumble. If Nietzsche wants to believe fairy tales, let him. But if he touches that supply train, I will wipe his people from these canyons like dust from a boot." He tipped his hat again. "Good day, Caldwell. Try to keep your lady out of politics. It is unbecoming." Briggs strode away toward his horse, leaving a wake of nervous silence behind him. "Claire," Thomas hissed, grabbing her arm with surprising force. "You must never speak to him like that." "Are you mad?" "He frightens you," Claire said, looking at her betrothed. It was not a question. "He is the law here," Thomas said, his voice pleading. "He can make life very difficult for a merchant. Or a wife. Come inside, please." That evening, they dined in the hotel restaurant. The steak was tough, and the coffee was bitter. Thomas drank 3 glasses of whiskey, his hand shaking slightly every time he lifted the glass. "We should marry this week," Thomas said suddenly. "Saturday. I have spoken to the preacher." Claire set down her fork. "Thomas, I just arrived 3 hours ago. We have not even discussed our home, or—" "It is not about the home," Thomas snapped, then lowered his voice, looking around fearfully. "It is about safety. A single woman in this territory. It draws attention. Briggs, he has an eye for things he wants. Once you are Mrs. Caldwell, you are protected. You are property of a husband." Claire felt a flash of irritation. "Is that what I am, to be property, to be fenced off?" "You know what I mean." Thomas reached across the table, his palm sweating. "I want to take care of you, but I cannot do that if you are exposed. That man, Briggs, he twists things. He uses people." "Why is he so fixated on the Apache?" Claire asked. "If they are just living on their land." "It is the railroad," Thomas whispered. "The investors want the land clear. Briggs has arrangements. If he can provoke a war, he can drive the Apache onto the reservation or into the grave. Then the land is open. He needs a provocation. He is desperate for one. And you know this." Thomas pulled his hand back. "I hear things. I sell supplies. I just want to stay out of it. And I want you out of it too." Claire looked at him. She saw a man who was fundamentally kind, but hollowed out by cowardice. He was not protecting her. He was hiding behind the institution of marriage to make himself feel like a man. And yet, she had made a promise. She was 25, a spinster by Eastern standards. This was her chance for a life. "We can discuss the date tomorrow," Claire said gently. "I am tired. Thomas." The next morning, the sun rose like a hammer striking an anvil. Claire dressed in a lighter muslin gown and walked out to the hotel veranda to catch a breath of air before the heat became unbearable. A shadow fell over her. "Admiring the view. Miss Donovan." It was Major Briggs. He was mounted on a magnificent black stallion, looking down at her. Behind him, a column of soldiers was forming up, alongside several heavy wagons covered in canvas. "Major," Claire nodded, "you are moving out early." "The supply train," Briggs said, gesturing to the wagons. "We are escorting it to the fort. It is a short ride, perhaps 4 hours. The scenery through the canyon is spectacular. Red walls, ancient carvings, much better than the view from this porch." He paused, a smile playing on his lips. "Why not accompany us? You could see the frontier under the finest protection in the territory. We will be at the fort by lunch. I can have an escort bring you back before dinner. It would be a fine way to educate yourself on your new home." Claire hesitated. Her instincts, sharpened by years of hunting with her father in the Pennsylvania woods, warned her that a predator was making an offer. But another part of her, the part that had stared back at the Apache chief yesterday, the part that felt suffocated by Thomas's fear, was intrigued. She wanted to see the land. She wanted to understand what was happening out there in the silence. And surely, with 50 armed cavalrymen, she would be safe. It was just a ride to the fort. "Thomas would worry," she said. "Caldwell worries if the wind blows too hard." Briggs scoffed. "You are a woman of spirit. Miss Donovan, I saw it in your eyes yesterday. Do not let this country cow you before you have even seen it." The challenge hung in the air. Claire looked at the dusty wagons, at the soldiers sitting tall in their saddles, at the open desert beckoning beyond the town limits. "I will need 5 minutes to get my hat," Claire said. Briggs smiled, and this time, it looked like the grin of a wolf who had just seen the gate to the sheep pen left unlatched. "We will wait." Claire turned and walked into the hotel, her heart beating a rhythm against her ribs that felt dangerously like a war drum. She told herself she was going for the scenery. She told herself she was going to understand the country. She did not admit, even to herself, that she was going because she wanted to see if the man with the dark eyes and the painted chest was really out there, watching. She grabbed her hat and her gloves. She left a note for Thomas at the desk. 10 minutes later, Claire Donovan was seated on the buckboard of the lead supply wagon, rolling out of Lone Mesa, headed straight into the heart of the storm. The wheels of the supply wagon groaned against the hard-packed earth, a rhythmic protest that seemed to echo the tension radiating from the soldiers escorting it. Claire Donovan sat on the buckboard beside a young private who looked no older than 18, his knuckles white as he gripped the reins. The sun had climbed to its zenith, bleaching the color from the world until the desert looked like a photograph left too long in the light. Major Briggs had separated from the column an hour ago, claiming he needed to inspect a ridgeline to the east with his lieutenants. He had left the wagons under the command of a sergeant with a face like cured leather. Claire felt a prickle of unease at the memory of Briggs's departure. He had tipped his hat to her with a smile that was too sharp, too knowing. She shifted on the hard wooden seat, scanning the horizon. Her father had taught her to look for movement in the Pennsylvania woods, the flick of a deer's tail or the disturbance of leaves. Here, everything was still. The saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels, their arms raised in surrender or warning. The silence was not empty. It was heavy, like a held breath. "Are you doing all right, ma'am?" the young private asked, his voice cracking slightly. "I am fine," Claire said. "Is it always this quiet?" "Don't like it," the boy muttered. "Too quiet. Even the lizards are hiding." The road dipped into a narrow arroyo, a dried riverbed flanked by walls of red sandstone that rose 30 feet on either side. It was a natural choke point. Claire felt the hair on her arms stand up. She reached down and tightened the laces of her boot, an instinctive preparation for flight that she did not fully understand. The first shot did not sound like a gunshot. It sounded like a dry branch snapping, magnified 100 times. The private beside her jerked back, a look of surprise on his face as a red bloom appeared on his shoulder. He tumbled backward into the wagon bed. Ambush. The scream tore from the sergeant's throat. Defensive positions. Chaos erupted. From the rim of the canyon, figures appeared, silhouetted against the blinding sun. They unleashed a volley of gunfire that echoed off the canyon walls, creating a deafening cacophony. Horses screamed, rearing in their traces. The wagon in front of Claire's swerved violently, its wheel striking a boulder. It tipped onto its side with a sickening crunch of splintering wood, spilling crates of ammunition and flour into the dust. Claire's wagon lurched as the terrified team bolted. She grabbed the dash, her fingers digging into the wood. But the momentum was too great. The wagon hit the debris of the first crash and went airborne. The world spun blue sky, red earth, the flash of sun on metal. Claire hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. She rolled, her skirts tangling around her legs, and scrambled behind the cover of a fallen crate. Dust filled the air, choking and thick. Through the haze, she saw riders descending the canyon walls, sliding their horses down the steep scree with reckless abandon. They were screaming high-pitched yipping sounds that chilled the blood. "Apache!" one of the surviving soldiers yelled, firing his carbine blindly into the dust. "It is the Apache." Claire wiped the grit from her eyes and peered over the crate. The riders were closing in, circling the overturned wagons like wolves. They wore buckskins and feathers, and their faces were obscured by war paint. But as one rider passed close to her hiding spot, Claire frowned. He was wearing heavy cavalry boots. She looked closer. The man was shouting gibberish, sounds that mimicked a language but held no rhythm. Beneath the crude vest he wore, she saw the collar of a checkered shirt, the kind sold in the general store in Lone Mesa. The paint on his face was smeared, as if applied in haste. He held his rifle not like a warrior who lived on horseback, but like a man used to shooting from a stationary position. These were not Apache. "Kill them all," one of the riders shouted in English, his voice guttural. "Leave no witnesses." Claire pressed herself flat against the earth. This was not a raid for supplies. This was a massacre designed to look like a raid. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the din. It was a different kind of cry, deeper, resonant, terrifyingly disciplined. From the opposite end of the arroyo, a second force struck. They moved like water, fluid and unstoppable. There were perhaps 12 of them, riding low on their horses, their bodies painted with symbols that looked precise and meaningful. They did not fire guns immediately. They lost arrows with deadly accuracy, silent missiles that found the gaps in the attackers' cover. Leading them was the man she had seen in town. Naichi. He rode a paint horse, his face a mask of concentrated fury. He did not scream. He simply killed. He drove his horse straight into the flank of the masked riders, swinging a war club with devastating force. The fake Apache, caught off guard by the arrival of the very people they were impersonating, fell into confusion. Claire watched, mesmerized and terrified. The battle had turned into a three-way slaughter. The few remaining soldiers were firing at everyone. The masked men were trying to fight Naichi's warriors while fleeing. A masked rider, realizing the tide had turned, spurred his horse toward Claire's position. He raised a heavy pistol, his eyes visible through the holes in his burlap mask, cold and panic-stricken. He intended to silence the witness. Claire scrambled backward, her hand closing around a loose rock. It was a pitiful weapon, but she raised it. Before the man could pull the trigger, a small shadow launched itself from behind the overturned wagon. It was not a warrior. It was a child. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, with hair like black silk and a dress made of deerskin, threw a handful of sand into the horse's face. The animal reared, throwing the rider's aim off. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from Claire's foot. In that split second of distraction, an arrow took the rider in the chest. He fell from the saddle, landing in a heap. The little girl did not run. She stood frozen, her chest heaving, staring at the dead man. Then she looked at Claire. Her eyes were vast pools of terror, dark and trembling. Claire did not think. She lunged forward, grabbed the child, and pulled her down behind the crate, covering the small body with her own. The girl did not resist. She buried her face in Claire's shoulder, her small hands gripping the fabric of Claire's dress with a strength that spoke of desperation. She made no sound, no crying, no screaming, just a silent, shivering vibration against Claire's ribs. The gunfire began to taper off. The masked men who were still alive were fleeing back up the canyon walls, abandoning their dead. Naichi's warriors pursued them to the rim but did not follow, disciplined enough not to ride into a second trap. Silence returned to the arroyo, heavier than before. It was the silence of the grave. Claire slowly lifted her head. The dust was settling. The ground was littered with bodies, mostly soldiers, and several of the masked attackers. Naichi rode into the center of the carnage. He signaled to his men, who began to check the bodies of the attackers. Naichi dismounted and walked toward Claire. He moved with a predator's grace, silent and efficient. Up close, he was even more imposing. He smelled of sage smoke, horse sweat, and old leather. He stopped 5 feet from her, his rifle held loosely in one hand. He looked at Claire, then at the child clinging to her. "Tala," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. The little girl lifted her head but did not let go of Claire. She looked at Naichi, then buried her face back in Claire's shoulder. Naichi's expression flickered a momentary flash of pain before the stone mask returned. He looked at Claire, his dark eyes assessing her. "You are not hurt." No," Claire stammered. She was shaking now, the adrenaline fading. Who were they?" Naichi gestured to the dead man nearest them, the one who had tried to shoot her. "Ghosts. Men who want to be us." Claire gently detangled herself from the child enough to crawl toward the dead body. She had to know. With trembling fingers, she reached into the dead man's vest pocket. She pulled out a pouch of tobacco and something else, a brass button. It was tarnished, but the stamping was clear. It was the logo of the Transcontinental Railroad Company, specifically the Private Security Division. She had seen the same logo on the crates at the depot in town. They were railroad men, Claire whispered. "Hired guns." "Briggs." Naichi said the name like a curse. "He sends his dogs in our skin. He wants the world to see Apache savages killing soldiers. He wants his war." Claire looked around. Every soldier was dead. The deception was perfect. If the army found this scene, they would see arrows and bodies and assume a massacre. "You must go back to the town," Naichi said, though his tone suggested he knew the futility of the suggestion. "Tell them what you saw." "They will not believe me," Claire said, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "Briggs will say I am hysterical, or he will kill me before I can speak. I am at the loose end." Naichi looked at the horizon. "Soldiers will come soon. The noise carries. If they find you here alive, Briggs will finish what his dogs started. If they find you with us, they will say you kidnapped me," Claire finished. "Yes." Naiche looked at Tala, who was still gripping Claire's skirt. "Tala chose you. She has not touched a stranger in 2 years, not since—" He stopped. "She chose you!" A shout came from one of the warriors on the ridge. He pointed north. Dust was rising. A relief column. Or perhaps Briggs returning to discover the tragedy. "We go," Naichi said. "Now." He extended a hand to Claire. It was a calloused, dangerous hand. "Come, or stay and die with a lie." Claire looked at the dead soldiers. She looked at the brass button in her hand. She thought of Thomas, safe in his hotel, too afraid to speak the truth. She thought of Briggs and his cold, blue eyes. Then she looked down at the little girl. "Tala." The child's eyes were pleading, a silent language that cut through the noise of Claire's fear. "Do not leave me. those eyes said. Claire realized she had crossed a line the moment she boarded the wagon. There was no going back to the safety of the East. There was only the truth, and the truth was standing before her, painted for war. "I will not let them win," Claire said. She took Naichi's hand. He pulled her up with effortless strength. He swung her onto the back of his horse, then lifted Tala up to sit in front of him. "Hold tight," he growled, as they galloped out of the arroyo, leaving the carnage behind. Claire looked back once. She saw the vultures already beginning to circle. She was a captive now, in the eyes of the world. But as the wind whipped her hair and the heat of the warrior's back radiated through her dress, she felt a strange, terrifying clarity. She was riding away from civilization, but for the first time in her life, she felt she was riding toward something real. 2 hours later, inside the commander's office at Fort Defiance, Major Harlan Briggs stood by the window, swirling a glass of brandy. The scout stood at attention, covered in dust. "All of them?" Briggs asked softly. "Yes, sir. The wagons are destroyed. The escort is wiped out. It looks like a slaughter. And the woman? Gone. Sir, tracks lead south, into the Badlands. Naichi's band." Briggs turned. A slow smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of pleasure, but of satisfaction, like a carpenter fitting the final piece of a complex cabinet. "Perfect," Briggs said. He walked to his desk and sat down, pulling a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer. "The savage Naichi has attacked a peaceful supply train and abducted a white woman, a bride. No less, he has defiled the sanctity of our protection." He dipped his pen in the ink well. "Alert the newspapers in the East," Briggs commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "Tell the townspeople to arm themselves. I want every man who can hold a rifle ready to ride in 3 days. We are not just going to rescue Miss Donovan. Sergeant," he pressed the pen to the paper, the scratch of the nib loud in the silent room. "We are going to wipe the Apache from the face of the earth, and we will have the entire country cheering us on while we do it." The encampment was not the chaotic hive of savagery that the newspapers in the East loved to describe. It was a place of rhythm and order, hidden deep within the fold of a canyon where the red walls rose like the sides of a fortress. The wickiups were arranged in a crescent shape, opening toward the rising sun, constructed of willow poles and bare grass that blended seamlessly with the desert floor. Claire slid down from the horse, her legs trembling from the long ride, the moment her boots touched the ground. The silence of the camp broke. Dogs barked, children stopped their play to stare, and women paused in their work of grinding mesquite beans. It was not a welcoming silence. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of suspicion. Tala, the little girl, did not leave Claire's side. She gripped the fabric of Claire's skirt with a tenacity that turned her knuckles white. "Walk with your head up," Naichi murmured, standing close to her. "Do not look at the ground. To look down is to admit guilt." Claire straightened her spine. She walked through the gauntlet of eyes. She saw curiosity in the faces of the children, but in the men, she saw only hardness. One young warrior, whose face was painted with a single black stripe across the eyes, stepped into their path. This was Kola. He looked at Naichi, then at Claire, and spat on the ground near her dusty boots. "Why do you bring the White Death here?" Kola asked, his voice thick with anger. "She is a beacon for the blue coats." "She is a witness." "Kola," Naichi replied, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "And she is under my protection. The girl chose her." Kola looked at Tala, his expression softening for a fraction of a second before hardening again. "The girl is broken." "And this woman will break us all?" He stormed away, kicking up dust. Claire felt a cold knot in her stomach. She was safe from the desert, perhaps, but she was walking into a different kind of fire. They led her to a guest wickiup near the center of the camp. It was simple inside, smelling of sage and dried grass. There were buffalo robes and woven blankets on the ground. Naichi gestured for her to enter. "You stay here," he said. "Do not wander past the perimeter of the camp. The guards might not be as patient as I am." "Am I a prisoner?" Naichi, Claire asked, meeting his gaze. Naichi looked at her for a long moment. The firelight from outside cast dancing shadows across his sharp features. "You are alive," he said simply. "Decide for yourself if that makes you a prisoner or a guest." He turned to leave, but Tala darted past him and curled up on the buffalo robes in the corner. She pulled a blanket over her head, refusing to look at either of them. "She will not speak," Naichi said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Not since the day my brother died." "The accident," Claire said. "The riding accident," Naichi laughed, a bitter, dry sound. "My brother could ride a wild stallion before he could walk. He did not fall. He was found at the bottom of the ravine with his neck broken." "Yes, but his horse was found 3 miles away, shot in the head. The army said the horse panicked and ran after the fall, but a horse does not shoot itself." Claire looked at the small lump under the blanket. "And she saw it. She was with him," Naichi said. "She came back to camp 3 days later, walking alone, her feet bleeding. She has not spoken a word since. Whatever she saw, it stole her voice." He left them then, the flap of the wickiup falling shut. Claire sat down on the robes. She was exhausted, dirty, and terrified. But as she listened to the breathing of the little girl in the corner, she knew she could not collapse. She crawled over to Tala and lay down beside her, not touching her, just offering a presence in the dark. "I am here," Claire whispered into the gloom. "I will not leave you." Tala shifted, her small back pressing against Claire's stomach. It was an act of trust so profound it made Claire's throat ache. The days that followed fell into a pattern that was both alien and strangely natural. Claire expected to be treated as a slave, but the Apache women mostly ignored her, treating her with a wary indifference that was preferable to hostility. She could not sit idle. Idleness gave her too much time to think about Thomas Caldwell and the life she was supposed to be living. She wondered if Thomas was mourning her, in her darker moments, late at night. She suspected Thomas was merely relieved that the problem of a headstrong wife had been removed. Or perhaps he was terrified of what Briggs would do to his business if he asked too many questions. She wrote in a small, leather-bound journal she had kept in her pocket, documenting the truth of her days, asking herself if she was losing her civilized self or finding a new one. To earn her keep, Claire began to help. She carried water from the creek, the heavy clay jars bruising her shoulders until her muscles hardened. She sat with the women as they repaired clothes, her needlework from the drawing rooms of Pennsylvania proving surprisingly useful on buckskin. It was on the 3rd day that the old woman approached her. Her name was Gray Sani. She was the spiritual anchor of the band, a woman whose face was a map of every winter she had survived. She had eyes that were milky with age, but seemed to see things that were invisible to others. Claire was by the creek, washing the dust from her hair, when she saw the old woman watching her from the bank. "You wash like a white woman," Gray Sani said. Her English was broken but understandable. "Too much splashing. You scare the fish." Claire froze, then slowly wrung out her hair. "I will try to be quieter." Gray Sani chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling together. She moved closer, leaning on a staff made of twisted ironwood. "You look at us. You look at the children. You look at the mountains. Most white people look, but they only see what they want to take. You look like you are asking questions." "I have many questions," Claire admitted. "Good," Sani said. "Answers are easy. Questions are heavy. You carry a heavy burden. Daughter of the East." "I am not a daughter of this place," Claire said. I do not know what I am here for." "The wind brought you," Sani said, tapping her chest with a gnarled finger. "Not the soldiers, not the horse. The wind. It pushes people where they need to be, not where they want to go. You think you are here by accident, no. The girl, Tala, sees your heart. A child does not cling to a stone." The old woman reached out and touched a lock of Claire's damp hair. "Be careful. The wind can also blow out a fire if it is not strong enough." From that day on, Gray Sani took Claire under her wing. It was not a formal tutelage, but a quiet sharing of space. Claire learned that tu meant water, ko meant fire, and yade meant sky. In return, she taught the children sitting around the fire words like friend and book. The children were the bridge. They did not have the hardened hate of the adults. They were fascinated by the buttons on her dress and the color of her eyes. Tala was always there, a silent shadow, watching Claire teach. Occasionally, Claire would see Tala's lips move, mimicking the shapes of the words, though no sound came out. But the tension in the camp remained. Kola watched her like a hawk, his hand always near his knife when she was close. He spoke loudly to the other men about the danger she represented. "She is a spy," Kola argued by the fire one night, loud enough for Claire to hear from her wiki-up. "She learns our ways to sell us to the soldiers." "She works," Naichi's voice replied, calm and firm. "She carries water. She cares for the child. A spy does not blister her hands for us." It was during these evenings, when the sun dipped below the canyon rim and painted the world in shades of violet and blood orange, that Naichi would come to her. They did not speak of romance. They spoke of survival. "Why do you fight?" Claire asked him one evening as they sat near the horses. She was brushing the coat of the Mustang that had carried her to safety. "We do not fight for the sake of fighting," Naichi said. He was checking the hooves of his mount, his movements gentle despite his size. "We fight to breathe. Briggs and the railroad men. They look at this land and see lines on a map. They see grid squares and profit. We see our mother. You do not sell your mother. Briggs calls it progress." Claire said softly. "Progress is a wheel that crushes everything in its path," Naichi said. He stood up and looked at her. "My brother tried to talk to them. He went to the fort under a flag of truce to discuss the boundaries. He believed there was room for everyone. That night, he died. Do you know who did it?" "I know it was not an accident," Naichi said. His eyes were dark pools of grief. "Briggs led the investigation. He smiled when he told me my brother was careless. That smile was a confession. He wanted me to strike then. He wanted me to kill every soldier in that fort so he could bring the heavy cannons from the east. He wants a war of extermination. Claire, not a skirmish." It was the first time he had used her name. It sounded different on his tongue, shorter, sharper, but not unkind. "I'm sorry," Claire said. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to reach out and touch his arm, to offer some physical comfort. But she held back. The space between them was charged with something electrical, something dangerous. "Do not be sorry," Naichi said. "Be ready. The peace of this canyon is a fragile thing." The fragility of that peace shattered 2 days later. It was mid-morning. Claire was helping Grace Sani sort dried herbs when the sound of hoofbeats thundered against the canyon floor. 2 scouts rode in, their horses lathered with sweat, their sides heaving. The camp instantly mobilized. Men grabbed rifles. Women gathered children. The air went tight with fear. Naichi met the scouts in the center of the clearing. Claire stood up, dusting her hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw Kola running toward the chief, his face twisted in a grimace of vindication. Naichi listened to the scouts, his face darkening. He turned and looked straight at Claire. He walked over to her, the camp watching in silence. "Briggs is coming," Naichi said. "He has a column of 60 men and a cannon." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "Here. He is a day's ride away. He has trackers. He knows we have you." Naichi's voice was devoid of emotion, but his eyes were burning. "He has sent a messenger ahead. He claims he wants to parley. He demands the return of the white woman who was brutally kidnapped." "He knows I was not kidnapped," Claire said. "He knows he set the trap." "It does not matter what he knows," Kola interjected, stepping between them. "It matters what he can prove. If we give her back, he loses his excuse to attack us today. We can move the camp. We can disappear." "If we give her back," Naichi said, looking at Kola. "She dies. Briggs will not let her live to tell the truth about the attack on the wagons. She is the only witness who isn't an Apache." "She is one white woman," Kola shouted. "Why should we die for her? She belongs to them." "She belongs to herself," Naichi snarled, stepping close to Kola. "And she is under my protection." Then you doom us all." Kola spat. The camp was divided. Claire could feel the weight of their stares. Some looked at her with hatred, blaming her for the approaching storm. Others, like Grey Sani, looked at her with sadness. Claire looked down. Tala was standing there, gripping her skirt. The little girl looked up, her eyes wide with the return of the terror that had been slowly fading. If Claire left, if she went back to Briggs to save the tribe, she would die, and Tala would be lost to the silence forever. But if she stayed, she brought fire and death to these people who had given her water and shelter. "Naich," Claire said, her voice trembling but clear. "If I go to him, if I surrender—" "He will kill you before you reach the fort," Naichi said. "And then he will attack us anyway, claiming we killed you. Briggs does not want you back. Claire, he wants you to be silent." "Then what do we do?" Claire asked. Naichi looked at the canyon entrance, then back at her. The warrior and the leader warred within him. "We prepare," Naichi said. "We do not run. We do not hide. If he wants a war, we will give him one. But we will choose the ground." He turned to the warriors. "Prepare the defensive positions in the upper ridges. Move the women and children to the high caves." As the camp exploded into activity, Naichi turned back to Claire. "You must stay with Tala. You must stay alive, because when the shooting starts, the truth is the first thing to die." Claire nodded, grabbing Tala's hand. She realized then that her old life, the life of tea parties and merchant husbands, was gone. She was part of the canyon now, part of the fight. She was not a prisoner. She was a target, and for the first time in her life, she knew exactly where she stood. The council fire burned low, casting long, dancing shadows against the canyon walls that seemed to mimic the restless spirits of the night. The air was thick with the scent of burning juniper and the sharper tang of fear. Claire Donovan stood in the shadows of the guest wickiup, pressing herself against the woven bear grass, listening to the debate that would decide her fate. She had learned enough of their language in the past weeks to catch the shape of the arguments, if not every nuance. "She is a stone around our necks," Kola argued, his voice carrying the sharp edge of hysteria. He paced around the fire, gesturing wildly toward the north. "Briggs waits for an excuse. Holding a white woman is not protection. It is a death sentence. We take her to the edge of the Badlands. We leave her. If she lives, she lives. If the desert takes her, it is the will of the spirits." And when she walks into the fort, Naichi's voice was lower, vibrating with a calm that seemed to irritate Kola even more. "When she tells them we treated her as a guest, do you think Briggs will let her speak? He will cut her throat and say we did it." "Then let her die," Kola shouted, spinning to face his chief. "Better she dies than the whole tribe. My brother died for this land. I will not lose my son for a white woman." A heavy silence followed. Then, the dry, rattling voice of Grey Sani cut through the tension. "You look only at the rifle. Kola, you do not look at the sky." The old woman poked the fire with her ironwood staff. "The girl, Tala, has not spoken since the blood soaked the ground a year ago. Today, she brought this woman a flower. The spirit of the child knows what the warrior does not. This woman is not a prisoner. She is a bridge. We do not burn bridges before we cross them." Claire pulled back into the darkness of the tent. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She looked at the small form of Tala, sleeping on the buffalo robe. The child's breathing was soft and rhythmic, a stark contrast to the violence being debated outside. Claire knew Kola was right in a way. Her presence was a danger to them. If she left now, if she slipped away into the night, perhaps she could draw Briggs's attention away from the canyon. She could try to make it to the next town, to Santa Fe, to tell someone in authority the truth. It was a suicide mission, but staying felt like selfishness. She moved quietly to her small bundle of possessions. She picked up her boots. A small hand gripped her wrist. Claire froze. She looked down. Tala was awake. The little girl's eyes were wide, reflecting the faint light filtering through the tent flap. They were pools of ancient sorrow, too deep for a child of 6. Tala sat up, Her grip on Claire's arm tightened, her fingernails digging into the skin. Her lips parted. She took a breath, a hitching, ragged sound, like a rusty hinge being forced open. "Do not," the child whispered. The voice was terrified, brittle as dried leaves. "Do not leave me." The sound shattered Claire. It was the first time she had heard the girl speak. It was not just a plea, it was a command from the soul. The walls of logic and fear that Claire had built around herself crumbled instantly. She dropped her boots. She sank to her knees and pulled the child into her arms. Tala buried her face in Claire's neck, sobbing silently, her small body shaking with the release of a year of silence. "I will not," Claire whispered into the child's hair, tears stinging her own eyes. "I promise, I am here." She held the girl until the shaking stopped. Then, with a new resolve hardening in her chest, Claire stood up. She smoothed her skirt. She walked out of the wickiup and straight into the circle of the council fire. The conversation died. Every eye turned to her. Claire looked at Kola, then at Grey Sani, and finally rested her gaze on Naichi. He looked tired, the weight of his people pressing down on his broad shoulders, but his eyes were alert. "I will not go back," Claire said clearly, in English. Then, haltingly, she repeated it in their tongue. "I will stay." Kola stepped forward, his face twisting. "You have no voice here, white woman." "I have a voice," Claire said, her tone matching the steel in Naichi's. "And I choose to use it. I choose to be here. I choose to witness. And I choose the truth." She looked at Naichi. "Tala spoke to me." A ripple of shock went through the circle. Naichi stood up slowly. "What did she say?" "She asked me not to leave," Claire said. "She found her voice because I am here. If you send me away, you silence her again. Is that what a warrior does? Silence his own children to save his own skin?" It was a challenge, sharp and dangerous. Kola looked ready to strike her, but Naichi raised a hand. He looked at Claire with a mixture of surprise and profound respect. "The council is finished," Naichi announced. "She stays." He walked over to Claire. "Come, there is something you must see." He led her away from the camp, up a winding trail that cut into the high walls of the canyon. They rode in silence for an hour, the moonlight turning the red rocks into a landscape of silver and black shadows. They arrived at a secluded plateau, a natural amphitheater hidden from the world below. It was a place of immense power. The wind whispered through the twisted junipers, carrying the scent of pine and ancient dust. Naichi dismounted and helped Claire down. He did not let go of her hand immediately. "This was my brother's place," Naichi said, gesturing to the expanse below them. "He came here to pray. He believed the spirits of the ancestors lived in the stone here. He brought me here when I was a boy, to teach me how to listen to the silence." He walked to the edge of the cliff, looking out over the dark expanse of the desert. "I am afraid, Claire." The admission hung in the air, stark and honest. "You do not look afraid," Claire said, stepping up beside him. "A chief cannot show fear," Naichi said, "but it eats at me. If I fight Briggs, I bring death to my people. If I surrender, I bring slavery. I look at Briggs, at the way he kills without feeling, and I feel a hatred so black it scares me. I am afraid that to defeat a monster, I must become one. I am afraid that by the time this is over, there will be nothing left of Naichi, only a weapon made of bone and blood." He turned to face her. The moonlight washed over his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the depth of his eyes. He looked noble and terrifyingly human. "You are not him," Claire said softly. "Briggs fights for greed. You fight for love. That makes all the difference." "Does it?" Naichi asked. "A bullet fired from love kills just as dead as one fired from greed." "But the man pulling the trigger matters," Claire insisted. She stepped closer to him, invading the space he usually kept between himself and the world. Tala spoke because she felt safe. She felt love. You protected her. You protected me. That is not the act of a monster. Naichi looked down at her. The tension in his body was palpable, a vibrating wire. He reached up and slowly unbuttoned the top of his heavy buckskin shirt. Pulling the fabric aside, a jagged, ugly scar ran across his pectoral muscle, close to the shoulder, plunging down toward his heart. It was old, but the tissue was raised and white against his bronze skin. "This is from the day my brother died," Naichi said. "A soldier's saber. It missed my heart by an inch. Sometimes. I wish it had not been missed. It would be easier to be a ghost than a leader." Claire looked at the scar. It was a map of his pain, a physical manifestation of the violence that had defined his life. Without thinking, she reached out. Her hand trembled slightly. "Touch me there," Naichi whispered. It was not a command. It was an invitation to the most vulnerable part of him. Claire's fingertips grazed the ridge of the scar. His skin was hot, feverish, under her palm. She could feel the heavy, powerful thud of his heart. It beat against her hand like a trapped bird, frantic and strong. She traced the line of the scar, her eyes locking with his. The air between them grew thin, charged with a current that made her breath catch. "It is just a scar," Claire whispered. "It is where the skin heals stronger." She moved her hand, sliding it from the hard ridge of the scar across his chest, until her palm rested flat over his heart, directly over the rhythmic thumping. "Touch me there," she whispered, echoing his words, but the meaning shifted. She wasn't talking about his skin anymore. She was talking about the fear he had confessed, the humanity he was afraid of losing. Naichi covered her hand with his own. His palm was rough, calloused from rains and rifles, but his touch was incredibly gentle. He pressed her hand tighter against his chest, trapping it there. "Show me where," he growled, his voice dropping to a rumble that vibrated through her bones. Claire took his other hand. She guided it to her own chest, placing his large, warm palm over her heart, over the layers of muslin and corset. Her heart was racing just as fast as his. "Here," she breathed, "where I am afraid, where I am angry, where I want to run. But I stay." They stood there, connected by the beating of two hearts that had no business beating together, the white schoolteacher and the Apache chief, standing on a cliff edge while the world burned around them. The distance between them evaporated. Naichi lowered his head. Claire rose on her tiptoes. The kiss was not like the kisses in the romance novels Claire had read back east. It was not polite. It tasted of smoke and desperation. It was fierce, a collision of two souls seeking anchor in a storm. Naichi's arm went around her waist, pulling her flush against him, hard and unyielding. Claire's hands tangled in his long hair, pulling him closer. It was a kiss of survival. It was a promise. "I see you. I acknowledge you. I am with you." They sank down onto the earth, the fire of the moment consuming the cold of the desert night. There were no more words, only the sound of breath, the friction of skin, and the silent language of two people trying to memorize each other before dawn brought the war. The fire burned down to embers. The darkness was total, but for the first time, neither of them was afraid of the dark. The sun rose over the canyon rim, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and gold. Claire woke to the smell of sage and the warmth of a body next to hers. They had slept wrapped in his buffalo robe, fully clothed but entangled in a way that felt more intimate than nakedness. She shifted, and Naichi opened his eyes. The guard was down. For a moment, he looked younger, the lines of stress around his eyes smoothed by sleep. A sound of shifting rocks made them both freeze. Naichi sat up instantly, his hand reaching for the knife at his belt. Standing at the edge of the clearing, 20 feet away, was Tala. The little girl was holding a small woven basket of berries she had collected. She was not looking at them with fear. She was looking at them with a wide, bright curiosity. She looked at Naichi, then at Claire, and a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "Uncle," Tala said, her voice stronger than the night before, clear as a bell in the morning air. "You smile, like before." Naichi's hand fell away from his knife, the tension drained out of him. He looked at his niece, then back at Claire. A genuine, crooked grin touched his lips. It transformed his face. Yes, little one, Naichi said. I smile. He stood up and walked over to the girl, lifting her into his arms. Claire watched them, her heart swelling with a feeling that was dangerously like hope. But the moment of peace was shattered by the sound of another horse. Kola rode over the ridge. He stopped his Mustang abruptly when he saw them. He took in the scene, the buffalo robe on the ground, the softness in Naichi's eyes, the way Claire stood with her hair loose and wild. Kola's face hardened into a mask of disgust and confirmed suspicion. So, Kola said, his voice dripping with venom, the council decides she is a guest, and the chief decides she is a bed warmer. Watch your tongue, Kola, Naichi warned, setting Tala down. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by the cold steel of the leader. You sleep with the enemy while the enemy sharpens his blade. Kola spat. She has bewitched you. She weakens your blood. You are not the Apache you were yesterday. I am stronger than I was yesterday, Naichi said, because I know what I am fighting for. Kola sneered. We shall see. The scouts have returned. He wheeled his horse around. They bring news. You better come hear it, if you can tear yourself away from her skirts. Naichi looked at Claire. The intimacy of the night was gone, replaced by the urgent reality of the day. Go, Claire said. We are coming. When they returned to the main camp, the mood was grim. A scout was kneeling by the fire, drinking water from his skin. He looked up as Naichi approached. Report, Naichi commanded. Briggs is not just coming with a patrol, the scout said, wiping his mouth. He has gathered the volunteers from the town. He has the miners, and he has new soldiers, fresh from the train, 200 men, maybe more. A gasp went through the gathered crowd. 200 men were an extermination force. And, the scout continued, his voice trembling slightly, they carry the flags, not just the stars and stripes. They carry the black flags of the railroad company. They are burning the scrub as they come. They leave nothing behind. Naichi looked at the northern horizon. A faint smudge of dark smoke was already visible against the blue sky. He does not come for the woman, Naichi said quietly to the silence. He comes for the land. He comes to finish it. He turned to his people. He did not look like a man in love anymore. He looked like the chief they needed. Kola, Naichi said, gather the rifles. Every bullet counts now. There is no more talk of running. He looked at Claire one last time. Get Tala to the caves. The storm is here. In the center of Lone Mesa, a wooden platform had been hastily erected beneath the scorching midday sun. It was draped in bunting that had seen better days, the red, white, and blue fabric limp in the breathless heat. Major Harlan Briggs stood atop it, a figure of martial perfection. His uniform was brushed free of dust, his boots gleaming like obsidian, and his voice projected across the gathered crowd with the resonance of a revival preacher. They have taken a daughter of the East. Briggs bellowed, gesturing toward the empty desert horizon. A woman of refinement, snatched from a peaceful caravan by the savage hand of the Apache, Miss Claire Donovan sits in chains right now, subjected to horrors we can scarcely imagine. Will we let this stand? A roar went up from the crowd. It was a mixture of miners, railway workers, and frightened townsfolk. Fear had been curdled into anger, just as Briggs had intended. Thomas Caldwell stood near the back of the throng, his hat pulled low. He looked pale, his hands trembling where he had jammed them into his pockets. He listened to the lies spilling from the major's mouth, the detailed, fabricated account of an Apache ambush, and felt the bile rise in his throat. He knew the truth. He had seen the invoices for the mercenaries. He had seen the unsavory men slipping into the major's office at night. But as he looked at the angry faces around him, courage failed him. He remained silent, a ghost in his own life. We ride at dawn, Briggs shouted, raising a gloved fist. For civilization for Miss Donovan. Standing beside the platform, a man named Sterling, a correspondent for the New York Herald, scribbled furiously in a notebook. He was already composing the headline, The Gallant Rescue of the Desert Bride. 2 days later, the reality of war descended upon the Red Rock Canyon. The Apache camp was a flurry of grim activity. The women and children were already moving up the narrow goat paths toward the high caves. Carrying water skins and dried meat, they moved with the silent efficiency of people who had known generations of persecution. In the center of the valley, the warriors painted themselves for death. Naichi stood by his horse, checking the action of his Winchester rifle. He looked at Claire, who was standing near a rock formation, watching the dust cloud on the horizon grow larger. It was a massive column. Briggs had brought not just soldiers, but a mob. "You must go to the caves," Naichi said, his voice tight. "Kola will lead the first charge from the ridge. It will be bloody. If you fight them, they will slaughter you," Claire said. She was dressed in a buckskin skirt and a shirt she had mended herself, her hair braided back. She looked nothing like the woman who had stepped off the stagecoach. "They have a cannon, Naichi. They have 200 men." "We have the high ground," Kola interjected, stepping forward. He had painted his face black, the color of no return. "Let them come. We will fill the pass with their bodies, and then they will starve you out," Claire countered. She turned to Naichi. "There is only one way to stop this before it begins. I have to go out there." "No," Naichi said immediately. "Briggs will kill you." "He needs a pretext," Claire argued, her voice rising. "His entire war is built on the lie that I'm a captive. If I ride out there, free and unharmed, and tell those men the truth." "If I tell the reporter what really happened?" "A white woman's word against a major." Kola scoffed. "It is the only weapon we have that shoots further than a rifle," Claire said. She grabbed Naichi's arm. "Trust me. You asked me to show you where my heart is. It is here. Let me do this." Naichi looked at the approaching dust cloud, then at the fierce determination in her blue eyes. He realized then that she was as much a warrior as any man in his band. "We will be right behind you," Naichi said. "If he raises his hand against you, he dies." The confrontation took place in a narrow throat of the canyon called Serpent's Coil. The army column halted as the canyon walls narrowed, the horses stamping nervously. Major Briggs rode at the front, flanked by his lieutenants and the scribe, Sterling, who looked less enthusiastic now that the heat and dust had ruined his suit. Behind them, the volunteer militia from Lone Mesa shifted uneasily. The silence of the canyon was unnerving. "Come out, Naichi!" Briggs shouted, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Surrender the woman and the leaders of this raid, and I will be merciful." Silence answered him. Then, from the shadows of the canyon bend, a single rider appeared. It was not a painted warrior. It was Claire Donovan. She rode tall in the saddle, her expression calm. A murmur rippled through the ranks of the soldiers. Briggs's horse danced sideways as he tightened his grip on the reins. His eyes narrowed. This was not part of the script. She was supposed to be cowering in a tent, or dead. Claire halted her horse 20 yards from Briggs. She looked at the soldiers, then at the townspeople, and finally at the scribbling reporter. "Miss Donovan," Briggs called out, forcing a look of relief onto his face. "Thank God. You are safe. Ride to us quickly. We will protect you from these animals." "I do not need protection from them, Major," Claire said. Her voice was clear, trained in a schoolroom, carrying effortlessly in the acoustic perfection of the canyon. "I need protection from you." The silence that followed was absolute, the scratching of Mr. Sterling's pen stopped. "The heat has added to her," Briggs said quickly, laughing nervously. "She has been bewitched. Come, soldiers, grab her bridle." "Stay back," Claire commanded. She looked directly at the militia. "There was no Apache raid. The men who attacked my wagon were white men. They wore masks. They were hired by the railroad company. I found their tokens in their pockets." "She is hysterical," Briggs snarled, his face reddening. "She has been tortured until her mind broke. I saw the invoices." Claire lied, bluffing with the confidence of a poker player. She pointed a finger at Briggs. "You orchestrated the attack to start a war. You want this land for the investors. Naichi saved my life. He is the only reason I am breathing. Mr. Sterling was writing furiously now, his eyes wide. The soldiers were glancing at each other. The narrative was crumbling. "That is enough." Briggs drew his saber. The metal rasped loudly in the quiet air. "The woman is a traitor or insane. Seize her if she resists. Shoot her." "You would order your men to shoot a white woman," Claire challenged. "Is that the heroism you promised the papers?" Briggs looked back at his men. He saw doubt. He saw hesitation. He realized he was losing control. His hand dropped to the heavy revolver at his hip. "Kill her!" Briggs screamed to his personal guard, the mercenaries he had embedded in the ranks. "Kill them all!" Before a trigger could be pulled, a small blur of motion erupted from the rocks behind Claire. It was Tala. The little girl ran out into the open space between the armies. She looked tiny against the towering canyon walls. She stopped beside Claire's horse. She was trembling, but her head was high. She pointed a small brown finger directly at Major Briggs. "I saw!" Tala screamed. The English was broken, shattered, but intelligible. "I saw you!" The child took a breath that sounded like a sob. "Night, fire, my uncle, he fell." Tala's voice rose to a shriek that tore at the heart of every man present. "You shoot! You laugh! I saw!" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. This was the witness Briggs had feared for a year. The mute child who had seen him murder Nietzsche's brother. "Lies!" Briggs roared, raising his pistol. "It is a trick. It is not a lie." The voice came from the back of the volunteer line. Thomas Caldwell pushed his way through the horses. He was sweating, his face pale, but he walked into the open. "Thomas," Claire whispered. "I saw the men. Briggs!" Thomas shouted, his voice shaking but gaining strength. "I saw you pay them at the livery stable. I was too cowardly to speak, but I will not watch you kill a child." The dam broke. "Stand down," a sergeant from the regular army shouted, lowering his rifle. "We are not shooting women and children." "Traitors!" Briggs screamed. He leveled his pistol at Claire, his eyes mad with rage. "Fire!" 3 of the mercenaries obeyed. Gunfire erupted. Claire threw herself from the saddle, not away from the danger, but toward it. She dove over Tala, covering the child's body with her own just as the bullets kicked up the dust around them. She felt a sharp, searing burn across her upper arm, as if a hot poker had been dragged across her skin. "Nietzsche!" Claire screamed. The canyon exploded. Nietzsche and his warriors poured from the rocks, not as a disorganized rabble, but as a disciplined wedge. They did not fire at the regulars who had lowered their weapons. They rode straight for Briggs and his hired guns. The valley dissolved into chaos. Smoke filled the air. Horses screamed. The regular soldiers pulled back, confused, refusing to fight for a commander who had just ordered the death of a child. The militia scattered. It was Briggs's mercenaries against the Apache. Nietzsche rode through the melee like a spirit of vengeance. He deflected a saber blow with the stock of his rifle and drove his horse into the flank of Briggs's stallion. Both men went down. They scrambled to their feet in the dust. Briggs lost his hat, his gray hair wild, his face a mask of primal fury. He lunged at Nietzsche with a knife drawn from his boot. "You should have died in the dirt with your brother," Briggs spat. Nietzsche caught Briggs's wrist. The 2 men locked together, a struggle of sheer strength. Nietzsche looked into the eyes of the man who had tormented his people, the man who had killed his blood. "My brother died looking at the stars," Nietzsche growled. "You will die looking at me." Nietzsche twisted. There was a sickening snap of bone. Briggs howled, dropping the knife. Nietzsche spun him around and drove a fist into the major's jaw, sending him sprawling into the dust. Briggs reached for his fallen revolver. A shot rang out. Briggs froze, then collapsed backward, staring up at the slice of blue sky between the canyon walls. Nietzsche turned. Thomas Caldwell stood 10 feet away, a smoking pistol in his shaking hand. The merchant had finally found his courage. The fighting stopped as quickly as it had begun. The mercenaries, seeing their paymaster dead and the regular army turning against them, threw down their weapons. Silence returned to the canyon. broken only by the groans of the wounded and the heavy breathing of the survivors. Naichi did not look at the dead major. He ran toward the center of the valley, where a woman lay in the dirt, covering a child. "Claire!" He fell to his knees beside her. Claire rolled over, wincing. Her sleeve was torn, soaked in bright red blood. Tala was underneath her, dusty and wide-eyed, but unharmed. "I am all right," Claire gasped, clutching her arm. "It is just a graze." Naichi looked at the blood on her fingers. It was the same red as his own. He looked at Tala, who was clinging to Claire's waist, weeping softly. "You touched me," Naichi whispered, his voice thick with emotion, looking at the wound that she had taken to save his blood. "You took the fire for her." "I told you," Claire managed a weak smile, though her face was pale from shock. "I chose to stay." Naichi ripped a strip of cloth from his shirt and bound her arm. He looked up. The regular army sergeant was approaching, his hands raised in peace. "Mister." Sterling was standing nearby, his face pale, staring at the body of Major Briggs. "Write it down," Naichi said to the reporter, his voice carrying the weight of the mountain. "Write it all down. Tell them we did not start this. Tell them we finished it." Claire leaned her head against Naichi's shoulder. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a throbbing pain in her arm. But as she looked at Tala, safe and whole, she knew the scar she would carry was worth the price. She had stepped between the worlds, and for the first time, the bridge had held. The smoke from the skirmish in Serpent's Coil did not clear quickly. It hung low in the canyon, a gray shroud over the bodies of the mercenaries and the few brave warriors who had fallen defending the pass. The silence that followed the gunfire was not peaceful. It was heavy, filled with the groans of the wounded and the sharp, clicking sounds of cooling rifles. Major Harlan Briggs lay where he had fallen, his sightless eyes staring up at the Arizona sky he had tried to conquer. Mr. Sterling, the correspondent, sat on a flat rock, his notebook resting on his knee. His hand shook as he wrote, the nib of his pen scratching frantically against the paper. He was no longer writing a puff piece about a gallant rescue. He was writing the story of the decade a corrupt officer, a railroad conspiracy, and a massacre prevented by a child's testimony and a merchant's bullet. Sergeant Miller, the highest-ranking survivor of the regular Army detachment, approached Naichi. Miller was a career soldier, a man of rules. But he was also a man who knew the difference between a battle and a murder. He looked at the Apache chief, then at the body of Briggs. "We will take the major," Sergeant Miller said, his voice gruff. "And we will take the mercenaries who are still breathing. They have a date with the military tribunal." Naichi nodded once. He did not offer a hand. There was too much blood between them for that. "Take them, and tell your generals the truth. The truth is already written," Miller said, glancing at Sterling. "And the little girl, her voice carried further than a cannon." Miller signaled his men. They began the grim work of loading the dead. The regulars did not look at the Apache with hatred anymore, but with a wary, grudging respect. They had seen the woman, Claire Donovan, throw herself in front of a bullet for a native child. That was a language every soldier understood. The return to the camp was not a victory parade. It was a procession of mourning. They had won the battle, but the cost was etched into the faces of the people. 3 warriors had died in the charge. Several wickiups on the outer rim of the camp had been torched by the mercenaries before the tide turned. The smell of burnt bear grass and roasted meat hung in the air, winter stores destroyed in minutes. Claire rode with her arm in a sling, her face pale from blood loss. Tala sat in front of her, exhausted, her small head resting against Claire's good shoulder. When they entered the camp, the wailing began. It was a high, keening sound that raised the hair on Claire's arms. The women whose husbands would not return cut their hair short and covered their faces in ash. There was no celebration. There was only survival. Dr. Henry, the regimental surgeon who had accompanied the column and refused to participate in the fighting, had come to the camp under a flag of truce to tend to the wounded. He worked silently alongside Gray Sani, It was a strange sight, the man of science with his steel instruments and the woman of spirits with her herbs and chants, working over the same torn flesh. The bullet passed through the muscle, Dr. Henry told Claire as he finished bandaging her arm. You were lucky, Miss Donovan. 2 inches to the left, and it would have shattered the bone. Keep it clean, though how you will do that in this dust is beyond me. I will manage, Doctor, Claire said. Thank you. You should come back with us, the doctor said, lowering his voice. To the fort, to civilization. This is no place for a lady. Claire looked around the camp. She saw Naichi lifting the body of a young warrior, a boy, really onto a burial scaffold. She saw Tala bringing water to the horses. She saw the resilience in the eyes of the women rebuilding their homes. I am exactly where I belong, Claire said. Thomas Caldwell found her near the creek later that afternoon. He was dressed in his travel clothes, his suit brushed clean, but looking out of place against the red rocks. He held his hat in his hands, turning the brim in endless circles. Claire, he said. Thomas, she replied. She did not stand. Her legs were still weak. She sat on a large stone, watching the water flow over the pebbles. He stood there for a long moment, struggling with words. I am leaving. The stagecoach heads east tomorrow morning. Sergeant Miller says I will not be charged for shooting Briggs. They are calling it the defense of a civilian. You saved my life, Claire said softly. And Naichi's. I surprised myself, Thomas admitted, a sad smile touching his lips. I have spent my whole life weighing risks, calculating percentages. Today, I just acted. I suppose every man has one moment of courage in him. I used mine up. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He looked at it, then closed his fist around it. I am not a man for the frontier. Claire, I like paved streets. I like knowing the law is written down in a book, not decided by a gun. I cannot stay here. I know, Claire said. And you cannot come with me. Thomas said, it was not a question. I watched you today. When you rode out there, when you covered that child, you looked like you were made of this earth. I have never looked at anything with that kind of fire. He stepped closer and took her good hand. I release you, Claire. Not that you need my permission, but I want you to know. I am not angry. I am envious. You found something worth bleeding for. I am just sorry it took a war for me to see you clearly. You are a good man, Thomas, Claire said, tears pricking her eyes. You stood up when it mattered. Goodbye. Claire, Thomas said. He kissed her hand, a gesture from a world that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Then he turned and walked toward the waiting army escort, his figure slowly disappearing into the heat haze, a man returning to a life of safety that Claire could no longer imagine. As the sun began to dip below the canyon walls, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red, the tension within the tribe began to surface. The external enemy was gone, defeated for now, but the internal wounds remained. Kola stood by the fire, his arm bandaged. He was watching Claire. She was trying to help a woman grind corn, using her one good arm. The motion was awkward, but she did not stop. She plays at being Apache, Kola muttered to the men around him. But watch her. She looks at the road the soldiers took. Her heart follows them. Her blood is on the ground, same as yours, another warrior argued. Blood dries. Kola spat. And then the skin underneath is still white. The army has pulled back because of the scandal. Yes, but they will return. And when the winter comes, when the belly is empty and the cold bites, she will remember the soft beds and the warm fires of her people. She will leave, and she will take the spirit of the chief with her. Gray Sani, who was tending the fire, looked up. You speak of fear. Kola, you fear she will leave, or do you fear she will stay and show you that courage has no color? I fear for Naichi, Kola said, pointing his chin toward the chief's wickiup. He looks at her and sees a future. I look at her and see a target. As long as she is here, we are never invisible. Naichi was alone on the ridge overlooking the camp. He was watching the horizon. The air had changed. The dry heat of the day was being replaced by a strange, static charge. The wind was picking up, whipping the mane of his horse. Claire climbed the path to join him. It was a difficult climb with her injury, but she refused to stop. When she reached the top, she was breathless. Naichi did not turn. "A storm is coming." "I know," Claire said. "I can taste the dust." "Not just wind," Naichi said. "The world is shifting. Briggs is dead, but the railroad remains. The Iron Horse does not sleep. They will pause, because the newspapers in the East are crying for justice. But money does not care about justice. They will come back." He turned to face her. His face was weary, the lines around his mouth deep with exhaustion. He looked at her bandaged arm, and a flicker of pain crossed his eyes. "You should have gone with Thomas," Naichi said. Claire stiffened. "Is that what you want?" "It is what is best," Naichi said, his voice hard, though his eyes betrayed him. "Look at us, Claire. Look at my people. We are burying our sons. We are eating the scrapings of the winter stores. We live with a rifle in one hand and a knife in the other. This is a life of blood and dust." "I am not afraid of dust," Claire said. "You are injured." Naichi's voice rose, cracking with emotion. "Today it was a graze. Tomorrow, next month, I cannot protect you from everything. I cannot build a wall high enough to keep the world out." He stepped closer, looming over her, trying to use his size and his anger to drive her away. "Go back, Claire. Go back to the cities where you can grow old and safe. Do not stay here and watch us die slowly. Do not stay here and make me watch you suffer." "I cannot go back," Claire said, her voice steady against the rising wind. "The woman who came on that stagecoach does not exist anymore. You killed her." Naichi flinched. "You and this land and that little girl," Claire continued, stepping into his space, forcing him to look at her. "You showed me what it means to be alive. Before this, I was sleeping. I was waiting to be a wife, waiting to be old. Now I am awake, and I would rather bleed here with you than sleep for 100 years in a featherbed in Pennsylvania." "You say that now," Naichi whispered. "But when the hunger comes, when the cold is in your bones, then I will be cold," Claire said. "But I will not be alone." She reached out with her good hand and touched his chest, right over the spot where she had placed her hand the night before. "You told me you were afraid that fighting would turn you into a monster," Claire said. "It has not, but pushing away love that will turn you into stone. Do not do it. Naichi, do not save me by destroying yourself." Naichi closed his eyes. He covered her hand with his own. The resistance drained out of him, leaving only the raw, naked need of a man who had found his equal. "I am a selfish man," Naichi murmured. "I should put you on a horse and drive you away with a whip, but I cannot." "Good," Claire said, "because I would just walk back." Down in the valley, the wind began to howl. A wall of brown dust, thousands of feet high, was moving across the desert floor. It was a haboob, a massive sandstorm that would swallow everything in its path. "It comes," Naichi said, looking at the wall of earth rushing toward them. "Let it come," Claire said. Below them, the camp was battening down. People were rushing into the wickiups, tying down the flaps. Kola was shouting orders, securing the horses. Naichi looked at Claire. "We must decide. We can go down to the caves, where it is safe, or we can ride out the storm here, in the open." It was not really a question about the weather. "We go down," Claire said. "To the people, to Tala. We face it with them." Naichi nodded. He lifted her onto his horse, swinging up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her, his body shielding hers from the stinging grit that was already beginning to fly. "Hold on," he whispered into her ear. "It will be dark soon." "I am not afraid of the dark," Claire answered. As they rode down the switchback trail, the sun vanished. The world turned a deep, bruised orange, then faded into a swirling brown twilight. The wind screamed like a banshee, tearing at their clothes, blinding them. But in the center of the storm, wrapped in the arms of the Apache chief, Claire Donovan felt a profound and terrifying peace. She had made her choice. She had chosen the storm. And as the sand scoured the land clean, erasing the footprints of the soldiers and the blood of the fallen, she knew that whatever came next, hunger, war, or winter, they would face it standing up. The falling action was complete. The adrenaline of the battle had faded, replaced by the grim reality of the future. But the bond was forged. Iron had met fire, and it had not melted. It had become steel. The seasons in the high desert did not change with a whisper. They changed with a shift in the light. The brutal, blinding white of the summer sun had softened into a golden, melancholy haze that draped over the red rocks of the canyon like a heavy quilt. The cottonwood trees along the creek had turned a brilliant, trembling yellow, dropping their leaves into the water to be carried downstream toward a world that felt very far away. It had been 6 months since the battle at Serpent's Coil. The scars on the land were beginning to fade. The scorch marks where the mercenaries had burned the scrub brush were covered by new growth, resilient sage and desert marigolds pushing up through the blackened earth. The scars on the people were healing too, though some would always remain tender to the touch. Claire Donovan stood in the doorway of the structure that had become the heart of her new life. It was not a wickiup, nor was it a proper Eastern schoolhouse. It was a hybrid, much like everything else in this borderland. It was built of adobe bricks and timber, with a roof of woven branches and mud. Inside, rows of rough-hewn benches faced a large piece of slate that had been salvaged from a ruined mining camp. This was the Lone Mesa Trading Post and School, a fragile experiment perched on the very edge of the Apache territory. Outside, the sound of hammering filled the air. 2 men, one a bearded trader from St. Louis, the other a young Apache warrior, were repairing a corral fence together. They did not speak much, separated by language, but they worked with a shared rhythm, passing tools back and forth. Claire smoothed the chalk dust from her skirt. She wore a dress made of calico, the fabric brought in by the last wagon train. But on her feet, she wore moccasins sewn by Gray Sani. She wore her hair in a single long braid down her back, a compromise between the styles of her 2 worlds. "Teacher!" The shout came from the yard. Claire smiled. A group of children were playing a game that involved a hoop and a stick. Among them, running faster than the rest, was Tala. The little girl had grown in the last half-year. She was no longer the wraith-like shadow who clung to skirts and hid from loud noises. Her skin was brown from the sun, her eyes bright and mischievous. Tala stopped when she saw Claire, her chest heaving with exertion. She ran over and grabbed Claire's hand, not out of fear, but out of affection. "We beat the boys," Tala announced proudly in English. Her accent was a perfect mimicry of Claire's own Pennsylvania lilt, layered over the guttural tones of her native tongue. "That is because you run like a jackrabbit," Claire said, brushing a stray lock of hair from the girl's forehead. "But it is time for lessons. Ring the bell." Tala ran to the iron triangle hanging from the porch beam, a piece of twisted railroad track, and struck it with a metal rod. The clear, high-ringing sound echoed across the valley. It was a sound of peace. The peace had been hard-won. After the death of Major Briggs and the revelations published by Mr. Sterling in the New York Herald, the political wind had shifted. The scandal of a rogue officer using mercenaries to provoke an Indian war had caused a stir in Washington. It was not a moral awakening, Nietzsche had reminded her, but a financial one. Wars were expensive. Bad publicity was bad for railroad stock. The Transcontinental Railroad Company had quietly adjusted its survey maps. The iron rails would now swing 20 miles to the south, bypassing the sacred burial grounds and the main water source of Nietzsche's band. It was a victory. Temporary, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. At the fort, a new commander had arrived. Colonel Wainwright was a man of 60, tired of war and fond of whiskey, whose primary ambition was to reach his retirement without another massacre on his record. He had established a zone of non-interference. As long as the Apache did not raid the settlements, the army would not patrol the canyon. It was an uneasy truce, held together by silence and distance. But in that silence, life had begun to bloom. Inside the schoolroom, 12 children sat on the benches. 8 were Apache. 4 were the children of the traders and trappers who had set up shop near the neutral zone. "Today," Claire said, writing the word on the slate, "we will talk about the river." She spoke in English, then repeated the sentence in Apache. It was a slow process, this weaving together of tongues, but it was the only way forward. She looked at the faces looking back at her. They were the first generation of this new world. They did not look at each other with the hatred their fathers possessed. They looked at each other as playmates, as rivals in games, as neighbors. Kola stood at the back of the room, leaning against the doorframe. The warrior had changed. The anger that had once radiated from him like heat from a stove had cooled into a watchful solemnity. He still carried his rifle everywhere, but he no longer fingered the trigger when he saw a white face. When the lesson was over and the children scattered back into the sunlight, Kola approached Claire's desk. He placed a small sack of pine nuts on the wood. "My son," Kola said, his English thick and hesitant. "He reads the paper now, the paper with the words. He is a quick learner." "Kola," Claire said. "He has a mind for stories." Kola nodded slowly. He looked at the slate, then at Claire. 4 months. He had watched her. He had watched her bandage wounds, carry water, and stand between his people and the soldiers. He had waited for her to leave, to break, to betray them. She had done none of those things. "You stay when the snow comes?" Kola asked. It was the question he asked every month, a ritual of doubt. "I stay," Claire answered, as she always did. "Good," Kola grunted. "The winter is hard. We need teachers." He turned to leave, but stopped. "Naichi returns tonight from the fort." Claire's heart gave a small, traitorous leap. Naichi had been gone for 3 days, meeting with Colonel Wainwright to finalize the boundaries for the winter hunting grounds. It was his new role. He was still the war chief, the protector, but more and more, he was the diplomat. He fought with words now, with maps and treaties. A battlefield he found exhausting and treacherous. "Thank you, Kola," Claire said. The warrior nodded, once a gesture of respect from a man who gave it sparingly, and walked out into the yard. Naichi rode in just as the sun was beginning to touch the western rim of the canyon. Claire was waiting by the corral. She watched him descend the trail, his silhouette dark against the flaming sky. He rode with the same easy grace she had admired on that first day in Lone Mesa, but his shoulders seemed less hunched, the tension in his neck less coiled. He dismounted and handed the reins to a stable boy. When he turned and saw her, the weariness in his face vanished, replaced by a warmth that was reserved for her alone. "You are late," Claire said, walking to meet him. "I was beginning to think the colonel had talked you to death." "The colonel likes the sound of his own voice," Naichi said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "He speaks for 2 hours to say what an Apache says in 2 words. "And the treaty?" "Signed," Naichi said. He pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. "We have the northern hunting grounds for the winter. The army stays south of the Red River. It is acceptable. It is peace," Claire said. "It is a pause," Naichi corrected her, though he smiled. "But I will take it." He stepped closer to her. He smelled of horse sweat, tobacco, and the dust of the road. It was a scent that had become more familiar to Claire than the lavender water of her youth. "Where is Tala?" he asked. "She is helping Gray Sani gather herbs," Claire said. "She told a trader today that I was her mother." Naichi went still. He looked at Claire, his dark eyes searching hers. "And what did you say?" "I said nothing," Claire replied softly. "I just let her hold my hand." Naichi let out a long breath. He reached out and took her hand, the one that had been injured, now healed, leaving only a faint pink scar on her upper arm. He traced the line of her wrist with his thumb. "Come," he said. "Walk with me." They climbed the trail to the high overlook, the same place they had gone the night before the battle. It had become their sanctuary, a place above the world where the air was thin and clear. The sun was setting in earnest now, setting the sky on fire. The clouds were streaks of violet and crimson. The desert floor below, a deepening purple. The wind blew through the canyon, carrying the chill of the coming autumn. Naichi stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He pulled her back against his chest, his chin resting on the top of her head. Claire leaned into him, feeling the solid, unmoving strength of his body. "Do you miss it?" Naichi asked quietly. "The soft beds, the rooms without dust. I miss hot baths," Claire admitted with a laugh. "And I miss reading new books, but I do not miss the emptiness. Back there, I was a ghost. Naichi, I was walking through rooms that belonged to other people, living a life that had been written for me before I was born. Here, I am real." "You are hard," Naichi said, his hand moving to cover hers where it rested on her stomach. "You have calluses on your hands. You have a scar on your arm." "I earned them," Claire said. "They are my map." She turned in his arms so she could face him. The dying light illuminated his face, softening the sharp angles. The scar on his chest was hidden beneath his shirt, but she knew exactly where it was. "I worry," Naichi whispered. "The world changes fast." "The railroad will bring more people. Towns will grow. The fences will multiply. Can we hold this? Can we keep this space for Tala for us?" "I do not know," Claire answered honestly. She reached up and touched his face. "Maybe in 10 years, this will all be gone. Maybe they will push us further into the mountains. Maybe they will win." "That is a dark thought," Naichi said. "It is a true one," Claire said. "But it does not matter, because they cannot take today. They cannot take this moment." She took his hand and placed it on her heart, pressing it firmly against the fabric of her dress. "Do you remember?" she whispered. "Touch me there." Naichi's eyes darkened with memory. "I remember. You were trembling." "I was terrified," Claire said. "I was terrified of loving you. I thought it would destroy me. And now I know that love does not destroy." Claire said, "It builds. It is the only thing that stands against the wind." Naichi lowered his head. "Show me where," he growled softly, the echo of their first night hanging in the air. Claire smiled. She moved her hand from her heart to his, interlacing their fingers. "Right here, beside you. You touch the most dangerous place on me," Naichi murmured, leaning down to brush his lips against her forehead. "Not the scar, not the war paint. You touched my heart. You made it beat again when I thought it had turned to stone. And you showed me that freedom is not a place on a map," Claire replied. "I thought freedom was the West. I thought it was the open sky. But it is not. Freedom is not facing east or west. It is standing exactly where you choose to stand, next to the person you choose to stand with." They stood there as the sun finally slipped below the horizon, plunging the world into the soft blue twilight. The wind whipped Claire's hair around her face, and Naichi smoothed it back. "Father, mother." The call came from down the trail. They broke apart, smiling. Tala was running up the path, her small legs pumping furiously. She did not stop until she slammed into them, wrapping one arm around Claire's leg and the other around Naichi's. "Gray Sani says the stew is ready," Tala shouted, breathless and laughing. "And she says if you stand up here kissing at the moon, you will get cold and she will not give you medicine." Naichi laughed, a deep, full sound that echoed off the canyon walls. He scooped Tala up and swung her onto his shoulder. "Then we better run," Naichi said. "No one wants to make the grandmother angry." He looked at Claire. He extended his free hand to her. "Coming home?" he asked. Claire looked at the man and the child. They were not of her blood. They were not of her race. They were not of her world. And yet, they were everything. "Yes," Claire said, taking his hand. "I am coming home." They walked down the trail together, 3 silhouettes against the darkening sky. The wind of the west blew around them, smelling of sage and cooling earth, of campfire smoke and dust. It was a wild, untamed wind. It offered no guarantees. It promised no safety. But as it filled Claire's lungs, sharp and clean, she knew it was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. She was not a Donovan of Pennsylvania anymore. She was not a captive. She was Claire of the Canyon. She was a mother. She was a partner. And for the first time in her life, she was not lonely. Thank you so much for riding along with Claire and Nietzsche on this journey through the dust and desire of the American West. I hope you could feel the heat of the Arizona sun and the beat of their hearts as you read. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or somewhere in between? Please leave a comment below and share your location and your thoughts on the story. Did the ending satisfy you? If you enjoyed this tale of love and courage, please consider subscribing to my channel. Wild West Tales, hit that like button to help keep the campfire burning. And if you really loved it, smash that hype button so more people can hear this story. Until the next ride, keep your eyes on the horizon.